Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax.
Listeners, I count myself as very fortunate to meet the people that I meet doing this job. Writers and readers from all walks of life and with various levels of experience and engagement in this industry. Some I meet through the podcast and engage with online, and others I encounter while at festivals or book events. So with that in mind, I think it was a few years ago now at the Romance Writers of Australia conference in Sydney that I met my next guest author, Valerie Miller. Valerie, while originally from Sydney, is now a Brisbane-based author, a teacher by day and writer and book coach by night. Valerie has published short stories in anthologies, and her debut novel, There's Something About You, Olivia Bennett, was published late last year. Now, this is a dual timeline story, my favourite kind, that draws on some of Valerie's Italian heritage and documents life for a migrant woman in Australia in the 1960s. A truly delightful story that, as the daughter of a migrant, I thoroughly enjoyed. So I'm so happy to have the chance to chat with you on the podcast today. Valerie, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited about being here. I listen to the show and I just can't believe that I'm a guest on your podcast. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Believe it, my friend, you are here.
I know. Little claps.
Little claps all round. And I want to say congratulations on There's Something About You, Olivia Bennett. We were talking a little bit before the show and I wanted to tell you how much I truly enjoyed this story. This was a beautiful dual timeline story that really kind of spoke to my heart. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really fortunate that so many people are loving the story and I'm getting some really lovely feedback and reviews already from it. And yeah, that just validates that it was the right story to write. And I'm so glad that I took a chance with it and just went and published it as an independent author. So yeah, you can't ask for much more. I mean, I write for my readers and I write stories that I enjoy reading, and I just wanted to be able to write something that somebody would read, get something out of it, get a little bit of history, because I'm also a history teacher. And then when they finish it, they sort of, when they just hug that book next to their chest and they just go, oh, okay. That's what I was really trying to get from that while I was writing it, yeah, and developing the characters and all the narrative, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a truly emotional story on so many levels, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But you did mention that this was a book that you indie published. Can you talk us through your decision to go it alone rather than get it traditionally published?
Yeah, so this book went through a lot of juggling. Do I indie publish? Do I traditionally publish? At first, it was going to always be traditionally published. I always like to do my due diligence. And as I was writing this first novel, I would read, I would listen to a lot of podcasts. I still listen to a lot of podcasts. I think you get a lot of learning listening from what other authors have experienced. And something that came out constantly was that the publishing industry is a hard gig. They run it as a business and they're going to make sure that they sell the books that they feel that they're going to be able to sell and be able to market and are successful for them. And so you don't always get a publishing deal because your books are not good enough. It's because it's not the right book for that time or whatever's on their list currently. So then I thought, well, I think you should get your book out there. I think everyone has a story. I think everyone has one story in the minimum. And I just think you should get your story out for everyone to listen. So then I started dabbling with the idea of indie publishing. And again, lots of research. I started listening to other podcasts that dealt with indie publishing. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to do this. But then I decided that if I was going to do this, I was going to play with the big boys. And if I was going to play with the big boys, that meant I needed to get professional editors, professional book design, do everything professionally. And so I set up a little company, a little imprint called Blushing Daisy Books, and that's what I did. And I was going to indie publish it, like I said. And so then I decided I needed to practice that. And I thought, how can I see if that's something I wanted to do? So I was doing a Master of Letters in Creative Writing. at the time. And so I had all these short stories that were getting really good marks at uni, and I was getting into online literary sites. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to publish an anthology of short stories, and I'm going to indie publish that, and I'm going to go through the whole process to see if I liked it. And I loved it. So I thought, okay, I'm ready to do indie publishing. I was working on Olivia Bennett, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do. And I was always going to indie publish it. And then I was going to the 2022 CYA conference here in Brisbane. They have pitching sessions. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to pitch it and see what people think of it. So I pitched it to 2 publishers and an agent. And I was really fortunate enough, the agent, which is Fiona Smith from Beyond Words Literary Agency, loved it. So she's now signed me up. And then I thought, you know what, if I can get an agent, then I reckon I can try for traditional publishing. So we spoke about it. We did a lot of work on the novel because it was way over the word count. And she sent it out for submission for about a year, but it just didn't get up. And then I had always told Fiona that if it doesn't get up, that's fine. I'll indie publish it. And it was ready to go. It just needed a proofread, edit, and professional cover design for it. And so that's what I did. Once we decided it wasn't going to get a publisher for this one, we let it go, and then I indie published it, and even had a little book launch. The English department threw a little book launch for me, which was really exciting because I was a bit nervous about being Nigel No Friends and having one and no one turning up. So I mentioned that to my head of department, and she said, no, we'll have it here. You'll have a ready-made audience. So that was good. And it's really good because a lot of the teachers brought it. Even I've got male teachers who are PE teachers who are currently reading it. They're a bit slow because they're maths and PE, but, you know, they're reading it, and they keep reporting to me saying how much they love it.
There's so much to unpack about this book. But before we do that, I wondered if you could tell me your inspiration for writing about Olivia Bennett.
Okay, so the first one was, I am not a shy wallflower, as you probably have figured out, and I am fascinated by people who are shy, always have been, even as a student, as a teacher. Shy, quiet, reserved people really fascinate me, and redheads. Like real redheads. And so Olivia came to me first as a character with auburn hair, pale skin, freckles, and really incredibly shy. And I wanted to write a novel about her. And I started writing this one novel, which is now my practice novel, which will never see the light of day. And I wrote about 136,000 words, and I realized it wasn't working when I finished it. And so I scrapped it, and I took the character and then the title, because I love the title, always loved the title. And I sat down and thought, I really want to write a story about women and a journey that isn't always easy. So the first thing I did was I wanted to write about the forced adoptions that came out of Crown Street Women's Hospital, especially after Julia Gillard did her sorry address, I think it was in 2013. So the novel originally had a whole section on that, but we had to pull that because of the word count. But from there, I did all the research. I started to read stories about migrants who would go to the hospital to have their babies, because I read a book on Crown Street Women's Hospital, and you read about the stories and that. And I went, oh my goodness, I need to say and tell the migrant women's females' voice. So that's where that started. But then I've always had this picture of Rosemary, and I always love Italian movies, and I've been always fascinated by Gina Lollobrigida, and I just think she was just beautiful, and Marilyn Monroe. So as I started to develop this story, I started to come up with an idea of, I wonder what it would be like to be really beautiful, but it being a curse, like, because I had just finished reading Marilyn Monroe's biography as well. And then on top of that, I had read Zoe Boccabella. She wrote The Proxy Bride. She's a Brisbane author as well. And I've also been fascinated by proxy brides because my Zia, my auntie, is a proxy bride. And I had done some work when I was doing Italian years ago in my first degree. And so these ideas just all started to come together. And it was through the researching, because I do a lot of researching before I even start penning my stories. And so from the research, this story started to emerge about this shy young girl and this woman who I wanted to be her mum, who was also a proxy bride. But then I didn't want her to be and you have to read the story because I don't want to give too much away, but I didn't want her to be like the traditional type of proxy bride. So there's a story behind that as well. And then I wanted to also uncover and unpack this idea about being so beautiful that you're a curse. And then I thought, well, what happens if you're so beautiful and a curse and you're new to this country and you don't know the culture and the language, but you're a really strong woman at the time who wants to be a doctor that wasn't allowed to be a doctor. So you're right, there's a lot of layers into it.
Absolutely wonderful. I love all of those like bits of inspiration that you've referred to because they're the exact things that I want to talk about. But first, Valerie, for the benefit of those who haven't read your story yet, could you tell us about the story?
Yeah, so There's Something About You, Olivia Bennett is a dual timeline historical love story that weaves between 1989 and 1964. It follows a shy and curious young woman who receives a trunk from her late mother, Rosemary. Now, inside the trunk are items that challenges everything Olivia has wanted to know about her mum. And Olivia has always wanted to know who her father is, but her mum has always been really tight-lipped about it. And so as Olivia begins to dig into her past and uncovers the truth, she discovers a story of migration, lost dreams, and love. But she also starts to discover her own sense of voice and confidence in the process. And I suppose this is a story about the courage it takes to uncover the truth, but it also covers details about the unexpected places you can find love and belonging in the process as well. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack in this story. And as you've just mentioned, it's a dual timeline story, which kind of goes back and forth between 1989 and the 1960s. Now, most listeners will probably have heard me say this before on the podcast, but 1989 is considered historical now. And that's really shocking. That's in my lifetime.
I had just finished school. I was in the workforce.
And so, it's the story of Olivia trying to get to know who her mother Rosemary was, and also the story about how Rosemary began her life as an Italian migrant here in Australia. And so you mentioned that you did a lot of research to bring this story to the page, but how did you go about fleshing out those two timelines?
Okay, so basically how I do it is I always start with the historical story first. Once I do a whole character analysis research, I build a whole life around Rosemary. So who she was, her backstory, a lot of backstory, because as I teach my students, backstory informs conflict for the characters and their flaws and their pain points. So I built a whole backstory in, and I have loads of pictures and I have notebooks. So I have like specific notebooks and I build those. And once I built a story of Rosemary, I just wrote the whole narrative for her. But I'm a planner. I'm not a tight planner because I do allow myself to be flexible and let the story take me where it needs to, or the character take me where they want me to go. But for this one, I used the Save the Cat plan for this one. And so I just planned it out. And once I got that all written, I went and started writing Olivia's story. I just remembered I did actually write the first 11 chapters of Olivia's story first before I broke and went into Rosemary's story. So I know my beginning and I always know the end. So I knew the ending. I knew how I wanted to finish it straight away. So I was pretty much heading towards that end. Then I wrote the complete story for Olivia, and I was still quite green with this. So you're learning as you go. And then when I wrote the two stories, then I printed everything out. And then I cut it, and then I told my family to go away for the weekend because I needed the floor space. And then I laid out this manuscript all over the floor, and then I started to work out how to embed the timelines to make them work. But then that wasn't the end, because then once I did that, the story started to change a little bit and it started to give me more ideas. So then I went back to the drawing board and I started to work on the second draft. And then I did that whole process again. I printed it all out, I cut it all up, and I just had it all laid out. And then I sort of added dates and timelines, and then I had to make sure that it all flowed and all made sense. And then I sort of got the gist of the story of where it was going. So it was a little bit of so separate writing, then blending it, then looking at it again. And then from there, the story just started to refine itself more in my mind. I've got a really vivid imagination. It's really quite good, but it can be quite destructive on other points because I just go off with the fairies a lot because my brain starts thinking about stories. I don't even remember how many drafts I did. To be honest, I think I lost count after about 12, maybe 13, 15 drafts. And then when I felt I was really ready, that's when I hired a structural editor and I used her for my anthologies. So Rachel is from Canada and we've become really good friends, and she's going to be working on my second novel. So she was excellent. She understood my voice and she understood what I wanted to do with the story. And so together she sort of teased out what I needed to do. And then again, we refined what needed to happen. I think if you relax into your story and give homage to it, and treat it like a sacred creative vessel, I think it will do it for you as well. If you respect it, it will come to the party for you. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that way of thinking. Now, Valerie, you mentioned earlier Crown Street Hospital here in Sydney, and in the book we're talking about St Elizabeth's. And so my question was that based on a real hospital? And I think we've got the answer to that. That was Crown Street Hospital. Was it just that book that you researched in order to bring Rosemary's experiences alive on the page, or were there other things that you researched?
So with the hospital, it was just Crown Street Women's Hospital. I was born at St Margaret's Hospital in King's Cross. I was always fascinated the fact that I was born in King's Cross. I don't know why, that was just like really, something I thought was really exciting, being born near the red light district of Sydney. And then I started watching Love Child. And that really, I think that really sparked my whole idea about this forced adoptions. But really it was Julia Gillard's apology when she was Prime Minister that really spoke to me. And I thought, my God, can you imagine being a mum and having a baby taken away from you? And a lot of these mums were single mums and they were young. And yes, I did a lot of work with that. Yeah, a lot of reading from Crown Street and stuff on internet, and there's a Facebook page, and then I would send out requests to people asking them if they were nurses and had they worked at Crown Street Hospital, and I'd send all these questions and they'd send questions back to me and answer all these questions. So that's how I basically did the research for it.
That's remarkable. I love that. I mean, the forced adoption issue is something, it's a topic that's been written about quite a lot now. But, I mean, Rosemary comes into contact with lots of unwed mothers in her work at St Elizabeth. I think she kind of shows a very human side to the young mothers that are in the hospital there, doesn't she?
Yeah, because she's like, as Italians, you look after your babies. Like, in my family, it wasn't just my mum that was raising me. It was my nonna, my zias. It was a whole village that raised us. So I think for an Italian to have a woman not treated with reverence because she gave birth to a baby, even though it's like out of wedlock at the time, we would never treat a baby or a mother that way. Well, not in my experience. And so I just found that really quite sad to know that so many women had their babies taken away from them. I'm a mum and I just couldn't imagine that happening to my little girl. So that really, really has resonated with me. But the original manuscript had much more on that. But because we were like way over the word count, like I'm not even going to tell you how much over the word count because it's embarrassing. We basically had to pull that whole storyline out. But that's okay because there's a new book brewing in my head with that material. And I'll probably use Marie Middleton as the protagonist for that story.
Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier Zoe Boccabella's The Proxy Bride. And interestingly, Rosemary was a proxy bride in this book. So tell me what a proxy bride was and why was this an issue for you that you wanted to explore in the book?
Okay, so the first thing is my Zia. So my mum has two older sisters and the middle sister, one above my mum, my Zia Maria, she was a proxy bride. And basically when after World War II and Australia needed all these migrants to come and repopulate us after the war, our Second World War, a lot of the people that came over were men. And when the men were here, they were getting a little bit lonely. And they, some of these men are in their 20s and 30s and they want companionship. And unfortunately at the time, either the Australian girls weren't interested in a ethnic man or their fathers weren't. So the girls were interested and their fathers weren't because, it was a different era at the time and different cultural, ideals and beliefs. And so the men started writing back home saying if there was either they knew a girl from another village and say, hey, is so-and-so, is she still single? I really liked her. Do you think she'd like to start a new life in Australia? But Italian fathers would never, ever let their unmarried daughters travel from Italy to Australia on their own. And so what happened was, I think in the 16th century, proxy brides were really common between provinces. And so the men started to talk to their families in Italy, and then they started talking to the Italian government, and then they contacted the Australian government. So they came up with this idea that, well, we could actually have this marriage where we would have the bride in Italy. She would have the big wedding, they'd have the big celebration that Italians love to have, and then she would stand up at the altar in front of a priest in a white dress, and the groom would be a proxy, would be either her father or an uncle or a brother. While in Australia, the groom would be in a pub with his mates while she's getting married, and the paperwork would all have been done in Australia, and then the wife would travel. And there was boatfuls of proxy brides. At one point, there was like one boat that were just full of proxy brides coming to Australia. So there's not a lot written about proxy brides, but there is a lady in Melbourne who wrote a PhD on it, and I got my hands on that PhD and I read that. In the beginning, it was working really well, but then like everything tarnishes. And so then there were stories where either men were sending photos when they were like in their 50s, when they were 20s. So women were coming off the boat expecting a 20-year-old, but getting this 50, 60-year-old. Women were saying they wanted to get married. They would get off the boat and then not want to marry and then just disappear, which is one of the reasons that gave me the idea for Rosemary as well. And a lot of them had happy marriages and a lot of them didn't have happy marriages. And my auntie had a happy marriage, but my uncle was, an Italian man of his time, and, he was the boss of the house, and she really didn't have a lot of freedoms, and she was a bit more placid. And so I sort of watched this a little bit, and I just always wondered, like, what's it like to know that you're going to travel to a new country and you're already married to a man you've never met? Because my grandfather chose him. So my auntie didn't know him, so my grandfather chose him. And that's always really fascinated me because it's always been part of my story and my family's story, yeah.
I completely agree with you. I think I can understand from the women's point of view that in many ways it offered the opportunity for a new life and for some adventure perhaps, but also the thought of getting on that boat and sailing away to a country without your family where you didn't know anyone and you were going to be married to a man you had never met before is utterly terrifying. But as you say, there was a boatload of women in the same position. Did they all come from Italy, or were they from different nations?
So there were proxy brides from Greece. Malta was another place, but mainly, Italy, Greece, and Malta were the three that really. I mean, they were the ones that really were affected the most from the war. They became quite poor after World War II.
Now, the other thing that we were talking about a little bit before we started recording, Valerie, was the fact that I really loved that you engaged with the migrant experience. For a woman in the 1960s in Australia, it's not the place that we imagine Australia is now, or that we know Australia is now. It was a very different place. And Rosemary didn't have a very good time of things, did she?
No, but she was pretty strong. But that's because my mum came out in 1960 and she didn't have a really great time about it. And I get really upset when I think about this. And so mum was so bright, my mum. And I think maybe this is not autobiographical in any way, but mum was really bright and she could have done anything, but she ended up having to come to Australia, and then my grandfather passed away when they landed and they were sort of stuck here. And she was forced to go to work at a young age. And so, I heard stories of how it was really hard for my mum and how it was hard to sort of assimilate into the society. But then it wasn't easy for me. I was in primary school in the 70s and I had a really, really hard time being an Italian. And I mean, I don't want to talk about it because, it's the past is the past, but it wasn't easy. And I was lucky because I had an Australian sounding name, but my brother didn't. And he had a really tough time at school. And he was my younger brother, and I was constantly standing up for him and getting into fist fights over things that they were saying about his name. And so it was really hard. I found it was really hard for me. And it wasn't until I got to a high school that was full of Lebanese girls and Italian girls and Greek girls that I truly found I belonged somewhere, because I wasn't the only Italian girl in a sea of blonde and blue-eyed girls. It was like, oh, okay, I've found my people. It really wasn't easy for Italians, any Italians, yeah. I think why in Sydney is particularly why the migrants stick very close to their own hub, because they need that. They need that support and that sense of community.
In a lot of ways, the fact that they clung to each other for support and they lived in communities near each other was yet another reason that they were maligned in many ways. Instead of assimilating, or instead of learning the language, they would speak their own language and gain comfort from being close to one another. So it was just another thing that they had to sort of overcome in many ways.
Yeah. And, when I was at school, I didn't speak English till I was about 7. I could understand English and I could write it, but I wouldn't speak it. And I remember the principal had a meeting with my mum, and she was really vehement. She said, if you want your daughter to do well at school and survive, she needs to speak English. And that put the fear of God in my mum. So she came home and said, that's it, we're not speaking Italian at home to the kids. And now as a teacher, I have kids from non-English speaking backgrounds as a teacher, and I can tell you right now that their dual linguistic abilities puts them in great stead to produce fabulous work in the classroom. But we have so much more support, and we've just come, the education system has just come so far from when I was at school to me being a teacher with kids who speak English as a second language. Not so much in the school I'm in now, but when I was working in the western suburbs of Sydney, there were a lot of migrant kids there, yeah.
I love the way that you've infused this story with some of your own experiences, Valerie, and thank you so much for sharing those. Now, this is Olivia's story, and she is traumatised by the car accident that took her mother's life. And she hides this trauma by making herself small in many ways, doesn't she?
Yeah, she does. Very small. And she's shy too. And she has a fear of getting into any sort of transport. And I have a fear of flying. So I sort of drew off that. So she has actually got a fear of being in a car. That's another thing that I wanted to look into, was how can someone overcome that fear because other people believe in you and you have that support. Because she doesn't have a lot of support because she lives on her own. She lives above the bookstore. She works in the bookstore. She's got some amazing friends. I mean, I love Demi. Demi just comes to life on the page, and she just finds herself. And I just think that everybody who's had trauma or has felt alone has a right to be loved and has a right to find their people and to feel like they can be whoever they want, regardless of what their experience is. They have a right to be whoever they want, and they have a right to find a place where they truly belong, and, of course, to be truly loved. Because I think we all need to be loved. And I think without love, and I'm not talking passionate love, I'm just talking, because all kinds of love, because you've got best friend love, you've got Bertie who adores Olivia and takes her on as a surrogate daughter. You have Demi's mum who keeps feeding her food, and she does learn to open up. So it's like she was like this small bud of a rose, and then with the help of Demi and Sebastian and everyone around her, she just blossoms.
And speaking of Demi and Bertie and Mrs. Kokinos and Sebastian, I think the heart of this story is in many ways a story about friendship. It's about sisterhood. It's about women having each other's backs. Were you conscious of this while you were writing the story?
Absolutely. I am constantly sprouting about how women have had it tough for centuries, constantly. I have to be careful in the classroom because I do have boys in the classroom. I do teach in a co-ed school. But I just think that women have a right today to really bond together and to fight together and to connect together. And I think if women just do that together, we can beat everything. literacy issues, domestic violence issues, now homeless issues with women in their 50s, loneliness, mental health, people from different sexual backgrounds. We have a right, different cultural backgrounds. Women come together because we have that maternal instinct to care and nourish and nurture. And it is massive amount of superpower that we have. And I think the more we spread it, and if we can spread it through just fiction, so be it. But I very consciously write about women.
Now, talking of the sisterhood, you, like I am, are a member of the Romance Writers of Australia, and that's probably, I think that's where we met.
We
in
did.
fact. So tell me about the importance of being a member of Romance Writers of Australia, and how did that affect your writing journey?
So I got involved because I was looking for short story ideas for my anthology, and I came across the Sweet Treats competition that they run. And I had known about the Romance Writers of Australia, but I thought it was only an association for people who were published with like Mills and Boons and Harlequin. I had no idea that it was just open to unpublished authors. And it was from that competition and actually getting into the anthology for the first year that opened that up for me. And then I went to the first conference in Queensland because it was on the Gold Coast. And then I met all these people from Queensland because, the borders were closed at the time. And I just went, oh my God, there's all these beautiful, amazing people that love to write and love stories. I just went from there and I thought, I'm hooked, and I've been to every conference. And I think the Romance Writers of Australia, it gives you that connection to community, but you surround yourself with all types of writers from different levels. So you've got your aspiring, you've got your newbies, you've got your seasoned, you've got the ones that I think are the celebs, you've got the Sandy Barkers and the Pamela Cooks and the Rachel Johns, and you've got all these people that you read and you go, oh my God, they're around me. And then when you see how grounded and giving they are with advice, you found your people and your tribe. So other than the workshops helping you with your craft, you've got this sense of validation that what you're doing is, at whatever stage you are, is okay, because you hear stories from everyone else that they've been where you are. And so you know that the future is possible because you're surrounded with people who have succeeded. And I try and see that success as validation of, oh my God, this is so possible for not just me, but for anyone who chooses to have this as their goal. At the Fremantle conference, which I think is where we met, the Fremantle one, I met 3 other women, and we've become a writing group, and we've been meeting pretty much every month online, 2 in Perth, 1 in Melbourne. And we've actually called ourselves the Paper Dolls. We talk to each other. And so when we're having a down day, or when we've gotten bad feedback, or when we want to share each other's work, or we want to ask advice, we've got this little micro group that you can bounce ideas off, and it's like a safe spot to do that. So without Romance Writers of Australia, I don't think I would have found that connection. But it's not just them, it's everybody. Like I always say, if nothing happens from this, if I never get published traditionally, do you know what? And I'm getting goosebumps now saying this, I have been blessed to be surrounded by these amazing writers and people who I would never have been able to surround myself with if I hadn't become a member of the Romance Writers of Australia. So if anything, that's the gift of being a writer and the gift of being a member. And now I get to write for their magazine every month, which is what I wanted to do secretly all the time until I shared a cab with Jan, the editor, in Adelaide when we went to the zoo. And I found out she was the editor, and it was like, oh my God, I really want to write for you. And she was like, come on board. So I've been writing an article since October, and I love doing that as well. It's just fantastic. And when I heard what happened to America's group, it broke my heart, because I thought if anything ever happens to RWA, I would be so gutted, because it's such an amazing organisation.
Valerie, I understand that you're not only a teacher and a writer by night, but you're also a book coach. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And does that help you with your own writing, or how does that all work?
The book coach came about because I wanted to learn how to coach to help me with my writing. But then because I'm planning to step away from teaching it's actually 65 more teaching weeks. At the end of next year is when I stop teaching full time and either go part time or not at all. I haven't decided yet. But I was also looking for something I could do on the side to help not seasoned writers, because I think there's so many people out there that can really help them. But I just feel from where I've come from, I want to really help women who are raising families and who are working full time, who really want to write a story but don't know how to do it or don't have that support. When I enrolled to do the book coaching, it morphed into, I want to do this as a business now, because they talk about your zone of genius. And I really want to be able to share what I've learned and help somebody else to not only start their first draft, but finish it, and have somebody to coach them. So the difference between an editor, because I'm not an editor, even though I do help with the manuscript on a structural way, the difference between editors focus on the writing, book coaches focus on the writer. And that's what I want to do, because that's what I've done for nearly 30 years as a teacher. I've focused on the student. The book coaching is a vehicle for me to be able to do that, but it's also a vehicle for me to start some online courses that people can download, or eventually, run writing courses as well, because, I've got a lot of background work. I'm an English teacher. I know how to teach. I understand the pedagogical ways of developing lessons and feedback. I've done my master's in creative writing. I've got my degrees in literature, got the book coaching course, and I just want to be able to give all that back somehow. So it did stuff for me to help me with my writing, but then I've just realised that I want to be able to help more people. But having said that, I still don't understand, why is it that I can see issues in somebody else's manuscript and I can't see it in my own? I don't know. That's the $1 million question, because I say all this stuff and I help other people, and then I go, why can I not see this myself? Because I think this is too close to it, maybe. I don't know.
I think that's a very common thing. That's why we're never the best judge of our own work. It's because we simply can't see it. We're too close to our own work to see the flaws in it. And it's easier to come afresh to somebody else's work, and it's easier to criticise something that's already written than something that you've poured your heart into. I think that's just a common thing, really.
So the business doesn't really officially open its doors till about July, because I'm doing the business school part of it now and building my packages. It's there, as if somebody needs me, I'm there for them. So, yeah.
Well, Valerie, I'd like to offer you a final opportunity to tell listeners, if there was one thing that you'd like them to take away from this book, what would that be?
Okay, this is the big thing, that no matter what has happened to you in the past, you have the resilience and the courage to overcome it and be the very, very best version of yourself, always.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. You did mention to me that you were working on something else and that you were being mentored by a fairly big name in the Australian literary industry. Do you want to tell us quickly about that?
Yeah, so when I finished my degree, my Masters of Letters in Creative Writing, I realised that I had done everything I could in the craft, but I still felt that I needed more development. And I remember when I had my professors and my lecturers, they would sort of guide me in my work, and I thought that's what I sort of need. So I looked into getting a mentor, and I did a whole lot of research. And like Kate knows this, I am her biggest fan. Like I love everything Kate does. When I grow up, I want to be just like Kate. Like I adore everything. I think she's the most talented, beautiful, warm person. She's got a good heart. She's so giving, and we just click. And when I found this company, the Australian mentoring company, or I can't remember the name now, when I saw her name, I just went, I don't care how much it's going to cost me. I want to have Kate. And so when I contacted them, they told me that she was available, and I booked her in straight away. We've been working together for a couple of years, and she is brilliant. Like I have grown so much as an author because of her. And what she can deliver, it's just gold. It's just gold. She's just been amazing. And it's going to be really sad when it finishes. I think I'll cry. She's just amazing. I just adore her so much. And I'm really into fairy tales too and mythology. So she speaks my language in a way. So yeah, so it's been great.
I love that so much, and I can't wait to hear more about that book in the fullness of time. But now I want to say, Valerie, it has been an absolute joy to speak to you about this terrific, terrific book, and I can't wait to see what happens next for you. Thank you so very much, my friend, for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been so exciting and a dream come true. Thank you for the opportunity. I adored it.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading!